Shalom and welcome back to Honor of Kings. You're watching season number 3. This is episode 16, and this is being hosted this year on my channel, Hanging on His Words. And I am the host of this channel, Ken Heidebrecht. And with me, as always, is my amazing friend, biblical scholar, and just pioneer in the Messiah and preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God is my friend, Sean Griffin. Hey, buddy.
Hey, thanks for the warm intro, brother. Appreciate it, Ken. And I'm excited we're back. I think the people watching are excited we're back. And today we get to look at a fun book, The Testament of Job, and we get to try to do our best to test it and see whether it lines up. And so I'm excited to get into this one.
Yes, absolutely. I am as well. And there has been a bit of a hiatus, and my apologies to you folks who have been faithfully following our channels and my channel specifically with regards to my hiatus. I've been away for several months, and I'm back in the seat now and ready and prepared to provide much more content coming down the pike. So look forward to that. And yeah, I think Sean and I are planning on finishing out this season with about 20 episodes. And like I said, we're on episode 16 this evening. And Yahweh willing, we're going to continue with more seasons in the future, covering many more books. And so look forward to that. And so basically, if you guys are new here, or if there's anyone that hasn't seen Honor of Kings, just a quick kind of premise or background on what it is that we do here. It's very simple. What Sean and I do is we read books that have been in and out of canons all throughout history. We study them, we research them, and we see if they line up thematically or theologically with the the classical canon of our Protestant 66 Bible. And at the end of the episode, depending on how many episodes we're doing on a specific book, sometimes it takes more than one episode, we'll give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. In a way, we're acting like some of the councils of old, where we believe, we can read these books, we understand the theology, we get the message, and why can't we, like they, read and discover what is in these books and make a determination as to whether or not we should keep some of them in our Bibles, or if they were removed rightfully, then we can agree with these so-called scholars that used to do these things. So it's fun, and I've had a great time with you, Sean, doing it over the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, and even though it's most episodes, it's our council of 2, if we could put it like that. We do have guests on from time to time that take a look from their perspective at these books. And
if you do have questions, you guys, leave them in the comments of this video. Go to our study group. Like it, subscribe, do all those things. Join us in this quest for getting the full scope of God's word, in your knowledge and in your life, essentially. So don't feel afraid to do it. That's been my experience in times past, is that you get a lot of scrutiny and people thinking that you're joining a cult, or that you're not happy enough with God's book of the 66 in the Bible that we do have. And just test things, study. There's nothing wrong with looking into things deeper, and it's just amazing what you can find if you just do that. So,
and I think you said this a little earlier, just prefacing the idea of the show, but it is good to remind people that we do this. We do this solely. Our first point of comparison with these books we look at is their theology, and that's Ken and I have studied the traditional Protestant canon of 66 books to a depth and a degree that we feel competent in understanding what it teaches and how it consistently speaks on certain types of concepts within those 66 books. Yeah. So with that, that's probably, I guess, if I could try to be as transparent as possible, Ken, about this, that's our hermeneutic lens to start. Is, you and I together, for years before we started the show, we studied the 66 books to make sure we knew what they were talking about and we were confident in them. So now we know where to go and where to compare things. And so that's why you're here, part of our conversation.
Sean, there are so many people that are coming to the realization that there is more to their Bibles than what they've been told. There are more books. Men with agendas have gotten their hands on things, and they're realizing that. And so, this council that we, jokingly refer to is massive. There are thousands and thousands of people out there that realize books like First Enoch, Jubilees, Second Baruch, Second Ezra's, several books, even possibly this one that we're doing tonight, is legitimate scripture. Yeah, so this is, as Sean said, the Testament of Job. is what we're going to be looking into tonight. And it's really interesting why we actually decided to go this route. If you guys are familiar with the last couple episodes, I know they're several months back. If you haven't watched them, please do. It'll make a lot more sense why we decided to go with this book this evening. But Sean, what's the reason? Why did we choose the Testament of Job for this particular episode?
Well, what was it? A couple years ago, we stumbled across this book, and we realized that there's some claims in here that line up with the canon. That's pretty interesting. There's some unique things that we're going to test, and then the history of it is not easy.
Yeah.
The history of its manuscript history, the chain of custody, and different languages it's published in, and that kind of thing. But there's some interesting indicators, pro and against, that we're going to look at today. And we just thought it'd be a great book, that one that Ken and I found or came to the awareness of and started to study after we already started the show. And then after we did our, and so over time, we were like, man, this would be a good book to test as well. And then I guess the last few shows that we did was on the differences in the Masoretic and the Septuagint in the canonical book of Job. And so therefore, we were trying to show you that there are, for whatever reason, the book of Job is, in history, it is widely attacked and widely defended. So if you start, like, a lot of rabbis hate it, and then there's like a few rabbis that like it, and there's a lot of Christian apologists that love it, of course, and wanted to include it in their canons. But it's just, and I've tried to suggest on my shows that it's because Job was an Edomite, and he wasn't actually a direct descendant of Israel, or Jacob, I should say. And so Judaism naturally wouldn't like the fact that he's serving Yahweh, and he's faithfully serving Yahweh in the storyline, and he's being persecuted for his righteousness by his friends. And so I think it's interesting dialogue to discuss, and this Testament of Job adds some unique details to the story, and so we're gonna jump into it. Goes. Okay.
Yeah, there's many things about Job that characteristically, personality wise, just in terms of what his roles were, a lot of people don't realize the fact that he was more than just a really rich man who fell under some really bad circumstances, and that's what I really love about this book. Is that it really tells you who Job truly is, and it's amazing.
It is amazing. You want the first chapter?
I can grab it. Yeah, I can do it. All right, Testament of Job, chapter 1. On the day he became sick, and he knew that he would have to leave his bodily abode, he called his 7 sons and his 3 daughters together and spoke to them as follows. Form a circle around me, children, and hear, and I shall relate to you what the Lord did for me and all that happened to me. For I am Job, your father. Know ye then, my children, that you are the generation of a chosen one, and take heed of your noble birth. For I am of the sons of Esau, my brother is Nahor, and your mother is Dinah. By her have I become your father. For my first wife died with my other 10 children in bitter death. Hear now, children, and I will reveal unto you what happened to me. I was a very rich man living in the east in the land of Ostis, or Uz. And before the Lord had named me Job, I was called Jobab. The beginning of my trial was thus. Near my house there was the idol of one worshipped by the people, and I saw constantly burnt offerings brought to him as a god. Then I pondered and said to myself, is this he who made heaven and earth, the sea, and us all? How will I know the truth? And in that night, as I lay asleep, a voice came and called, Jobab, Jobab, rise up, and I will tell you who is the one whom you wish to know. This, however, to whom the people bring burnt offerings and libations is not God, but this is the power and work of the seducer, Satan, by which he beguiles the people. And when I heard this, I fell upon the earth, and I prostrated myself, saying, O my Lord, who speaks for the salvation of my soul, I pray you, if this is the idol of Satan, I pray you, let me go there and destroy it and purify the spot. For there is none that can forbid me doing this, as I am the king of this land, so that those that live in it will no longer be led astray. And the voice that spoke out of the flame answered to me, you cannot purify this spot. But behold, I announce to you what the Lord ordered me to tell you, for I am the archangel of God. And I said, whatever shall be told to his servant, I shall hear. And the archangel said to me, thus speaks the Lord, if you undertake to destroy and take away the image of Satan, he will set himself with wrath to wage war against you, and he will display against you all his malice. He will bring upon you many severe plagues, and take from you all that you have. He will take away your children, and will inflict many evils upon you. Then you must wrestle like an athlete and resist pain, sure of your reward, overcome trials and afflictions. But when you endure, I shall make your name renowned throughout all generations of the earth until the end of the world, and I shall restore to you all that you had. And the double part of what you shall lose will be given to you in order that you may know that God does not consider the person, but gives to each who deserves the good. And also to you shall it be given, and you shall be put on a crown of emerald. And at the resurrection you shall awaken for eternal life. Then shall you know that the Lord is just, and true, and mighty. Whereupon my children, I replied, I shall from love of God endure unto death all that will come upon me, and I shall not shrink back. Then the angel put his seal upon me and left me. Wow.
That's crazy.
So where is that in the book of Job in our canon of 66, Sean? Where is that information?
It's there's a lot of it not in there. There's some of it that's hinted at. His resurrection is hinted at in Job 29. I think it's verse 17. And we do get obviously who he was from the land of Uz in Job chapter 1:1. But we don't get all this information about Job actually taking it upon himself to go attack a temple of Satan.
No, we do not.
Which makes so much sense. Now, I don't want to sound biased, but I'm just saying from a theological perspective of what we're going to see in the next chapter, what we also see in Job chapter 1 and 2 in the canon, where Satan goes before God in heaven and starts this, want to inflict damage against Job. And so it's interesting how, I guess, Ken, what I'm saying is growing up, reading the book of Job, I always thought, man, what happens if Satan targets me like that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize Job was a king of the land, which means he's in a position of great influence and power over others. So, that's a highly targeted position by the enemy, right? Because they want to get those positions of influence. And I also didn't know that if this narrative is correct, Job actually was trying to rid the land of idol worship and all the horrific things that go along with idol worship, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think when the angel tells him you can't purify this land, but you can go through with what you're trying to do, but you won't be able to actually purify this land or this spot? What do you think that's talking about? Because I just have theories. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, for purifying the spot, I mean, it's alluding to a future time when the Father has his plan of Jerusalem and putting his name in a certain place, right?
Okay.
So, in my opinion, that specific spot isn't dedicated for that, because it's later on down the timeline when the true spot is going to be, purified and,
so
manifested on the earth.
Like a kingdom reference?
Yeah, it could possibly be that.
Okay. That was my first thought too, as far as, the angels, when they come back and they burn that entire area and they burn the ground, they burn it, that's a part of the Torah of purifying things, especially things that have been sacrificed to idols, or if there's been human blood that's spilt on the ground, they need to purify it with fire. And so I wondered if that's what's being alluded to as well.
Yeah. What's interesting, Sean, is this specific image that this idol is representing is apparently of Satan, right? Of the actual Azazel, the angel himself. Whereas we don't ever really see throughout the biblical narrative, idols set up of Satan. They're obviously ultimately pointing at him through worship by means of Baal, Molech, all the ones that represent Nimrod and
yeah.
But this is, to me, this is
unless
telling
there's the serpent, like Ra in Egypt to the Canaanites and to some of these Middle Eastern territories, they also would worship the serpent as well.
Right.
And so, but you're right, you don't see a mention in the canon of a lot of actual idols set up to the serpent. We see them in archaeology, though. I visited one in Belize, and I went to a Mayan temple in Belize, and they had the Quetzalcoatl flying serpent engraved up in there that the tour guide told me was one of the gods they worshipped. And so, and that was a place. The temple that we were standing on was a place where they had done female and child sacrifices, like young maidens and then also children. And we actually saw the stones where they laid the people and killed them in front of the priest would come and kill them and stuff. So
That's
that
crazy.
was at the temple of this pyramid with Quetzalcoatl engraved into the hieroglyphics on the pyramid. So I just wonder if it was something like this, or if it was like an astral pole, or like well, I can't think of the word right now, like an obelisk, or if it was just something we've never seen before because it was so ancient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, it's like, well, did Satan take such, you know, drastic measures because it was specifically his image? I mean, if it was like Baal or Molech or something that was under him, would he
Mhm.
have gone that route with attacking Job? You know what I mean? Maybe he had a personal vendetta because I don't know.
Yeah, the
But yeah.
angel, and this is something else you don't get in the canon book of Job. Is what the angel tells him in verse 19, which is, this is an image of Satan you're trying to destroy, but Satan will set himself to wrath, to wage war against you, and he will display against you all his malice. And I think that that's fascinating, because even with this warning, there's two things that I just want to point out. Job goes through with it, so kudos to courageous
He's
Job,
got a set on him, doesn't he? It's
doesn't he?
crazy. Yeah.
And what do we see though? And I think we're about to read in the next chapter, because it lines up with the canon book of Job. Satan still has to go before the Father and get permission to some
Yeah.
degree. And even the Father gives him like certain limiting factors. You can't do this to him, but I'll allow you to do this. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fascinating, because even though the angel's like, look, he's going to send all his wrath and malice against you, we see that Satan can't just walk up to him and kill him. Does that make
No.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in a weird way, it just makes me think of the book of Revelation, where we see that, Revelation 12:7, that Satan, the dragon, is full of wrath and mercy. Woe to the earth, for he comes down to you full of wrath and mercy. And he goes to, persecute the saints, to keep the testament of the commandments of God, and those who keep the testimony of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, apparently there's still believers that are not killed to death through persecution by the time Yeshua shows up, because those are the ones that get, the first resurrection event in the twinkling of an eye. They get changed without apparently dying first, right?
Yeah. Sean, those must be the ones that vote for the People's Party of Canada for some
Oh,
reason.
really?
I don't know. Like, it's not to get political or anything. We have our federal elections coming up soon, and
Okay.
it's not looking good in this country. But there is one party that seems to represent goodness and righteousness. So, who knows, right? But
Well,
Sean,
I hope there's a lot of Canadians watching right now.
yeah, that would be nice. Before, if Trudeau gets reelected, I may not be able to do this show, folks. So pray for us in this country, because he likes to censor things, and he has a personal vendetta against anything that goes against his narrative. So we will see, but I trust the Father, and yeah.
Well, if it comes down to it, I know some people, and I'll get my sword, and I'll be dropping in, pulling you out, brother.
That's nice.
We'll go Kingdom SEAL team, and we'll get you out, bro.
Sounds good.
All right. So,
John, there's so much more before we move on to the next chapter, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Like right at the beginning there, where it talks about verse 4. Know then, my children, that you are the generation of a chosen one, and take heed of your noble birth. What do you think that means? What's he alluding to there?
To me, that's where he's definitely a king, and I'm wondering what's going on here with this language. That stood out to me too, because usually that means Messiah, right? As far as being anointed or appointed. Now, we're not talking about the actual Messiah, the Son of God, because obviously this is a man that was born through Basora. But I'm just saying, to me, that's where that terminology usually comes from. He's appointed. He was not, and I could just be talking about his king, because he does say he was of noble birth, so maybe his father was also king as well. And I think we see that in Genesis 36 and Jubilees 41. Pull it up real quick.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, I just my 2 cents on it is, it could very well just be referring to the fact that he's a king, and they're born under that prestige. But I mean, as we see right in verse 5, he's of the sons of Esau, right? Which means they are of the lineage of Jacob. So,
yeah.
Or Isaac, rather. Sorry, Isaac. So he's still running in that line of, the chosen line, right? And we're told that only Jacob and his descendants are, the progeny of righteous ones that the Messiah will come through. And yes, the Messiah did come through the line of Jacob, but I mean, Esau had some sons as well who apparently were righteous. And you had mentioned earlier that Job was a king, but he also was a priest. We're gonna come across that later on, but we've mentioned that in previous episodes of Honor of Kings where he was a legitimate priest as well.
That's what
And
it seems
so,
like. Yeah.
yeah,
So I don't know, and that could be like I've tried to talk about a part of the idea of the Melchizedek priesthood, which is usually the ruler of the elder of the clan is also the priest because they've got the most experience in life and they've shown over a long period of time that they are righteous in their behavior, and so that's where that term Melchizedek comes from. It's a righteous ruler, and so I just think that I mean I don't know who Bela was, but it seems like I don't know if Bela was related to Basra. Um, so I don't know. But he claims to be of noble birth. We know that he's definitely a king. And usually of those time periods, kingdoms were passed down through nobility, through your actual bloodline, you know.
no, yeah. If I'm not mistaken, Sean, Bela is one of the brothers from Beor, and like Bela and Balak. I think they're the same because Balaam, I think, came from. Am I getting things mixed up here? Balak of Beor came from Beor, and I think it's the same Balak and Bela in the can of 66, and so I think they might have been brothers.
Okay.
I'm not sure. That I looked into that, and I think that's what I ended up discovering. But
Okay, interesting. So you're saying like the Balak and so this isn't the same people of Numbers because this is a couple hundred years earlier, right?
yeah, I think that's. I'm just trying to think of the timeline because I remember when I looked over it, I was like, the son of Beor stood out to me. I was like, well, I've seen that, and I think it was like, yeah, in Numbers where it talked about Balaam, or Balak, the son of Beor. Anyways, I'm belaboring this point. It's kind of not
It's
overly
okay.
relevant, but
It's
could
okay.
be an interesting little, lineage tie there. But
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's hard to say because you're trying to line up from different translations. And we're going to actually, here in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the different translations of the Testament of Job itself. But there's also translations of the canonical book of Job, as well as Genesis. And so with this, between the Hebrew, the Greek, the Paleo, the Aramaic, sometimes these names take on a different name. And then for the sake of copyright and avoiding copyright, modern translations will just pick a name from a different language and insert it so that it
yeah,
looks different, you know?
it
And
throws
so
things out. It can throw
it
things off.
really,
Yeah.
it makes it kind of tough. Anything else in this particular chapter you want to talk about?
Um. Well, I mean, we have angelic agency going on here too, right? The Shalia,
Right.
an angel showing up with a message for Job, and Job understanding that he's not worshiping Yahweh physically in the flesh. There, he's interacting with an angel, and we're told that it's an archangel of God that had come to him.
Yeah.
So I always like to point out that there is this agency taking place, right? It's not like a pre-incarnate Yeshua that a lot of people think happens throughout the scriptures. Is every time the word of the Lord comes or angel of the Lord, it's actually just a pre-incarnate Yeshua showing up. Like this is an angel literally coming from Yahweh as his mouthpiece to speak to Job on his behalf.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, and Jobab, right? So we also get the Jobab connection.
yeah,
That was what we just showed you in Genesis 36, but it's also revealed in, like we did our previous episode, the Septuagint. And the last chapter of Job, chapter 42, verse
42.
17, it tells you directly that this guy, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But so there's just a lot going on in this first chapter. It's a pretty big first chapter as far as what it introduces. I love the fact that he looks out. He kind of has a similar attitude as we see Abraham has in the book of Jubilees, chapter 12, where he looks out over the people and he sees them worshiping false gods. And he's like, wait a minute, that God didn't make heaven and earth. What are
Yeah,
they doing? You know, he has that same
yeah.
mentality of like, what's going on? And
He's got that heart. Yeah,
I got to stop this, you know? And that's what Abraham kind of did with his father. He tried to stop his father from doing that. And his father outright admitted to him in the book of Jubilees, hey, these people will kill us. I know that these aren't real gods, but these people will kill us if we try to stop this, you know? And so Job gets that same warning from, well, a similar warning from the angel that Satan's going to come after you with full force. And he goes through with it. So to me, this, you know, if this text is legit, to me, it makes a ton of sense as far as me reading the canonical book of Job because that was my biggest thing. Like that was in the first couple chapters, you just see Job was a righteous man, lived in the land of Uz, and suddenly the devil wants to attack him. And I'm just like, oh,
Yeah, there's no
that's
context
rough.
about
Yeah.
any circumstances as to how that gets set up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Sean, in verse 26, it says, "And at the resurrection, you will awaken for eternal life." That's the angel telling Job, essentially, this is, I'm giving you that hope that you will be resurrected, um,
Mm-hmm.
into eternal life. And that kind of rings back to the Septuagint version of Job 42:17, where it says, "And it is written that he shall rise again with the ones whom the Lord shall raise up." So we have, I mean, they knew what the resurrection was, right?
Yeah.
They knew that you would be awoken to eternal life, right? That awoken terminology referring to taking the sleep of death, what everyone knows if you understand the biblical cosmology and Sheol, that where we go when we die is into Sheol with our soul, and that gets taken out and we get awoken from our sleep of death and given eternal life here. So this is fascinating that they say that it's one of the oldest books, right? In Book of Job, but we have this resurrection talk right from the beginning. It's these patriarchs, these men of old, they knew the promises just like the rest of us, right? We didn't need the New Testament to come along and tell us that there's good news, guys. Like there's been good news since the beginning. So it's good.
Can you help me remember the passage in the book of Job, the canon book of Job, where he talks about, I know at the last I will rise.
Yeah,
Was it?
where
I
is
thought it was
that?
chapter 19.
Yeah, I think, isn't it?
I thought it was, but I looked in, I didn't see it.
Let me find out here. Job 19:25, isn't it?
Okay, here it is. Yeah. So he says, "But I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the end I will stand upon the earth, even after my skin has been destroyed. Yet in my flesh I will see God." And we reviewed this in the last few episodes about how he knows he's going to be resurrected back into a new body. That's how he can see God,
Yeah.
even after he's, the concept of his Redeemer in the end, allowing him to stand upon the earth is alluding to the resurrection. So my question is, if that's in the canon book of Job, and we're looking at this potential apocryphal, and I don't even like using that word, right? We're
Mhm.
looking at this potential book that could be should have been in canon. What do you think this means here in verse 26, where it's in not verse 26? Hang on one second. You just referenced it. What do you think it means in the Septuagint and 42:17?
42:17.
Yeah, where he's talking about this is the Job. Let me go to the Septuagint real quick. Talking about him, it's written that he'll
He
rise.
shall rise again.
So do you think that passage here, where'd it go?
42:17.
It's written right here. It's written that he will rise again. Is this what it's talking about is it talking about chapter 29, verse 25, or is it referring to what we just read stated in the
To
Testament of
me,
Job?
it's the Testament of Job. I think that's what it's specifically referring to because that whole chunk, as you know, Sean, is not in the Masoretic text.
Right.
All right, so
Interesting.
to me that as we're going to talk about a little bit, it's referring to the Syriac book in that context. So that's how I understand it, and it parallels with the Testament of Job, right? So it does make that assertion too. So it's an interesting harken back to that, right? It could be that chapter in Job, but I think it's more likely the Testament of Job that it's referring to with that specific passage. So
Okay. All right. Well, anything else in this chapter 1? It's a big
yeah,
chapter.
one more, bro.
Sure.
Verse 28. Then the angel put his seal upon me
Uh-oh.
and left me. What do we got going on there? That sounds revelation like,
And Ezekielish, right?
Yeah.
What is this seal thing that happens when angels come up and put seals on people when the enemy is attacking? I'm going to try to go to Revelation, was it chapter 8 first? Or excuse me, Ezekiel chapter 8 first. Maybe it was chapter 9. And I'm still in the Septuagint, though. Let me go here. We'll just use the traditional KJV. Do you remember what verse that was in chapter 9? I'm trying to think about top of my head here.
I don't. I honestly don't. Sorry.
That's okay. Look it up. You remember that part in Ezekiel, right?
Yeah.
Where the angel goes and seals people. It says Ezekiel chapter 9. 9:4. Yeah.
We got anyone in the comments that knows
It's right here.
where that's at?
It says it's 9:4. So it says, Lord said to him, go throughout the city, through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst of thereof. So this is this idea of him, and this says mark here, but I don't know if it says seal in other translations. It's the same word, though, in the Hebrew and in the Greek. But I think it's interesting because here's another example, just like Revelation, where they're putting a seal on someone that's not dead and they're not resurrected. They're still alive in the natural, in the flesh, the mortal flesh, but they're getting sealed. It's almost like protection.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah,
interesting.
it is. I mean, it makes me think about Revelation 7 with the 144,000 being sealed. But then again, I don't believe that that's referring to men before the resurrection either, within that context. So I don't know. It's interesting, man. I don't know. I was hoping that you would have some profound thing for me there, but
No,
yeah, that's a bit of a conundrum.
no. It just seems to be. There's two other books in the canon, or that what have been canonized, that have the same concept of an angel doing to mankind. So, as far as consistency, at least it passes the check right there.
Yeah, for sure.
As far as what angels will do.
All right, brother. You want to go to chapter 2 there? You want to read that?
Yeah, I'll jump to chapter 2. So here in chapter 2, verse 1, after this, I rose up in the night and I took 50 slaves and went to the temple of the idol and destroyed it to the ground. And so I went back to my house and gave orders that the doors should be firmly locked, saying to my doorkeepers, if someone shall ask for me, bring no report to me, but tell him he investigates urgent affairs. He's inside. And then Satan disguised himself as a beggar and knocked heavily at that door, saying to the doorkeeper, report to Job and say that I desire to meet with him. And the doorkeeper came in and told me, but heard from me that I was studying. The evil one, having failed in this, went away and took upon his shoulder an old torn basket and went in and spoke to the doorkeeper, saying, tell Job, give me bread from your hands that I may eat. And when I heard this, I gave her burnt bread to give to him, and I made known to him, expect not to eat of my bread, for it's forbidden to you. But the doorkeeper, being ashamed to hand him the burnt and ashy bread, as she did not know that it was Satan, took of her own fine bread and gave it to him. But he took it, and knowing what occurred, said to the maiden, go back, bad servant, and bring me the bread that was given to you to hand to me. And the servant cried and spoke in grief, you speak the truth, saying that I'm a bad servant, because I have not done as I was instructed by my master. And he turned back and brought him the burnt bread and said to him, thus says the Lord, you shall not eat of my bread any more, for it is forbidden to you. And this he gave me, saying, this I give in order that the charge may not be brought against me that I did not give to the enemy who asked. And when Satan heard this, he sent back the servant to me, saying, this is weird conversation that's happening between like Satan.
Yeah, I know.
Satan's at the front door. Job refuses to leave his room. It's
we got a confused female maid who doesn't really know the identity of this old man.
She doesn't have all the details.
Yeah.
And yeah, verse 15, and I replied, do what you desire to do and accomplish whatever you plot, for I'm ready to endure whatever you bring upon me. Oh, Job. And when the devil heard this, he left me, and walking up to under the highest heaven, he took from the Lord the oath that he might have the power over all my possessions. And after having taken the power, he went and instantly took away all my wealth. And that's it. That's the last of chapter 2.
All right.
So
what is going on here? What is the point in that little interaction there? Like, why did Satan decide? Like, why did he want Job to give him from his bread? What do you think the whole purpose of that was?
I don't know as far as the specific request, unless it was just simply to be able to see Job face to face and speak to him, because as we're going to read about, we read about this in the canon of Job as well, but we get a lot more detail in this particular testament of Job about how he was feeding the poor in his land, and he had these massive banquet tables set up at all times, 24 hours a day, for the people to come in, and he had servants attending to these things. And so for this particular beggar, Satan disguised as a beggar, to come to his front door instead of these things he's already had established, that would be my first, indication that this isn't right.
Mm-hmm. Do you think sorry, Sean, do you think maybe there's a possibility that he was getting fed, right, the libations and the food to the idol, like when they were presented to the idol? Do you think he physically would consume it somehow, or do you think he was trying to like get Job to give him more food? You know what I mean? Like it was. I just find it interesting that he's wanting, and it could be just a ploy to get face to face with him. But I find it super fascinating that Job gives him a burnt piece of bread. It's like, you know what?
Yeah.
You want bread? All right, you're not getting the good stuff. You're gonna get a burnt piece, and
Yeah,
it's an insult to him, right? Just
it is, because it's almost prophetic, right? He's like, you're going to be crispy in the future. I'm just giving you what's coming to you.
yeah,
So
the
yeah,
foreshadowing.
it is a weird request. I don't understand the request as specifically for that type of food. It seems like a plausible excuse to see Joe face to face, without violating him, like without just like showing up and crawling in his window or manifesting in his room or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
To which I don't know. See, that also makes me think about all these limits, these limits that the fathers, even in the canon, and chapter 1 in the canon, I believe I believe Satan says to Yahweh, well, you've set a hedge of protection around him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I don't know what that means. I don't know the details of that or what that looks like. I've always wondered that. Right. And now I only understand now it's because Job was doing the commandments. So guys, if you want to hedge protection around your life, do the commandments. That's the promise of the covenant, Leviticus 26. So praise God for that. But does this mean, is this why Satan can only interact with him in a certain way? I don't know. Just
Yeah, he's definitely not being a coward here, right? That being Job, because he knows what he's gonna have to endure. But I just find it funny that the first thing he does is he plays Wreck-It Ralph with his temple. Then he runs into his house, locks the door, gets his servants there, and is just like, I don't know if he's just like barricading himself ready for an onslaught of craziness. And like, because as we're gonna read eventually, like Satan's like, all right, you're gonna stay in your little house. I'm gonna get everything else outside of the proximity where you're at, and that'll, and then he eventually comes in and sweeps him off his throne or whatever with a whirlwind. But it's interesting how this all plays out.
Yeah, it's got some interesting details here about the interaction, and also just this idea that Satan knows that the servant shouldn't be giving him good bread. So that gives you some kind of indication of just what can angels do?
Yeah.
Like what can they hear better? Could he hear throughout the house the conversation? Can he see through the walls? Like do they have some sort of X-ray vision of some sort? Like how did he know the servant was supposed to give him the ashy bread and not good bread? So just little things like that. And we see, this type of behavior or ability, I should say, of angels from the good angels in the canon as well. So that's the other thing that came to my mind.
No, and it's very interesting. It makes you think more about what angels are capable of. I mean, as we're going to read, he comes as a hurricane. That's pretty crazy. Yeah.
Well, we've got some conversation in the live chat right now. People are wondering about the book of Job. Some people think it sounds fun. Some people think it sounds they're just enjoying exploring it with us. And there's others that think it's just a Greek Hellenistic work and that it's Gnostic and that it's not, there's no reason to review it apparently. So this is why we do this, because there is a reason to review it. And a lot of people don't realize that, there's, I don't really know where these terminology came from, Ken. And this is why I'm trying to bring this up, because for the audience listening, we're about to go into right now, after we read these first two chapters, we're about to go into the actual history of the manuscripts and the scholastic information, like we always do with these books.
Yeah.
But Ken, when we hear this claim, and we hear it often, of any book that's not in the Protestant canon of 66, people will start to say, oh, that's a Hellenistic 2nd century, Second Temple writing, 2nd century BC. That's that has a lot of Greek influence. We shouldn't really pay attention to that. That was just a Hellenistic influence. And you're like, what? How do you know? Because I've heard people make that claim about Jubilees. And I'm sitting there going, Jubilees expounds the most Hebrew Torah, like, of any book not included in the scriptures of the canon of 66.
I mean, a lot of times, Sean, and we've already said this many times, people base it off of what they think is the earliest manuscript, right? Earliest known manuscript, right? And if it's like 2nd century AD, it's like, well, that's when it was written, right? Well, no, that could have been previously copied from something much, much earlier, right? Multiple times over. It's just that's the one that they found it in. And so it's like, it's kind of not a good argument, to say that these books are not legitimate because the earliest copies of whatever book it is that they're, casting aspersions on is like, it seems too late for it to be legitimate, especially if it's talking about a certain time period in the work. But you know what I mean? So it's like,
Mhm.
that's not how recording works. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how
Yeah.
the scribal job works,
Mhm.
essentially. And so it's, I don't
Yeah,
know.
what I've jokingly said is the librarianship process. It's not how the scribes copied and handed down manuscripts over time. So just because we haven't dug out of the dirt one from 1100 BC or 2000 BC, doesn't mean that it wasn't copied and passed on through different generations and in different
Yeah.
languages. And I guess that's why we're going into this right now with our next portion of looking at this book, which is, I've prepared some ideas of modern scholars who have looked at the Testament of Job specifically. And these are not just normal scholars. These are people that are specifically trained in the Syriac. And there's one of this guy that's a prominent Syriac scholar. I don't know if he's still alive today. His last note that I could find about him was he was a emeritus professor in 2003. And his name is Sebastian Paul Brock. He was born in 1938 in London. He's a British scholar, university professor, expert in the field of academic studies of classical Syriac language and classical Syriac literature. His research also encompasses various aspects of cultural history of Syriac Christianity. He's generally acknowledged as one of the foremost academics in the field of Syriac studies, one of the most prominent scholars in the wider field of Aramaic studies. And I'll kind of explain that here in a minute because there's a reason why they mention Aramaic. Um, Brock obtained his BA in Hebrew and Aramaic from Cambridge. In 1966, he became a doctor of philosophy at Oxford. He was assistant lecturer and then lecturer at the University of Birmingham, the Department of Theology, until 1967. He continued his academic career as lecturer in Hebrew and then lecturer in Hebrew and Aramaic at Cambridge from 1967 to 1974. He was lecturer in Aramaic and Syriac and then reader in Syriac studies. And I'm guessing that means he can actually read Syriac.
Yeah. That's
At the University of Oxford's Oriental Institute up until 2003. So according to Brock, according to that guy we just talked about, the oldest surviving Coptic manuscripts is dated back to the 5th century CE. So that's about the year 400 something after Yeshua. Okay.
yeah.
And
And that's an Egyptian language, right?
right. The Coptic is the Egyptian Eastern Orthodox Church, right?
Yeah.
Closely associated with the Ethiopian Tawahid Eastern Orthodox Church as well. And the oldest surviving Greek manuscripts dates back to the 11th century CE. So as far as Brock also studied the Syriac and Arabian copies of the Testament of Job. But as far as the Testament of Job was found in lots of Syriac translations. The Byzantine illuminated scriptures also has the Testament of Job, and they actually made like a little picture Bible. I don't know if you saw that, Ken. That was pretty cool. They made like 1,600 little paintings, and many of it was of the Testament of Job and the canonical book of Job,
Hmm.
because in the Syriac they had the Testament of Job as one of their books. And a lot of people don't realize that the Syriac language is a variant of Aramaic. It's one of the dialects that is offshoot of Aramaic, and it was widely used all over the Middle East, even from Egypt all the way to China. They found Syriac manuscripts of the scriptures in the New Testament everywhere. And then I didn't have time to put it would have been just 2 hours of me showing you all the archaeological finds on Syriac. There's a ton of information on Syriac scriptures and different books that they have and have dug up in different places.
All right.
So this is just a quick preface on the Coptic and the Greek, okay? Just to show you that this book was not only found in Syriac, but also Coptic and Greek. And the earliest mentions of the Testament of Job in recorded history, as far as an actual someone else in a writing actually mentioning this book, is the decree of Pope Gelasius I, approximately AD 496, in which he condemned it as apocryphal.
Yeah, and that's a good word to use, like condemning it, because it seems
Right.
like anyone who doesn't like the theology in any book that they deem apocryphal or spurious, right? Something that isn't true in their eyes, then it's condemned and it's put on the back burner in the back of the book with its own section called, an apocrypha. Don't worry about this,
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So I actually, when I found this out, I did some more research and I was like, wait a minute, why did this Pope, wait till the 5th century AD to condemn this particular book? And then I realized, Pope Gelasius I designated the Testament of Job with the Testaments. which included other books such as the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs and the Testament of Moses. And he condemned them all as apocryphal. And because this was the actual Pope that was solidifying, this was after the Council of Trent, or not Council of Trent, but the Council of Nicaea.
Nicaea.
Yeah. And he was solidifying 100 years later a very hard and fast canon.
Yeah.
So he then said, these are the canons, this is true, and everything else is not true. And so it's apocryphal. And this is even before they came up with the word deuterocanonical. So this guy also rejects Jubilees and Enoch and other books that we found completely line up and have manuscript history attestation and a great chain of, you know what I'm saying? And so it's just interesting. I don't know if this is a good point or a bad point for the Testament of Job and its manuscript history, but they clearly had it to the point where it made the selection process according to the Pope. Now, I know a lot of us laugh and we make jokes about, the Vatican's got all the manuscripts in their basement, and they're withholding all these books from the world. And they do have a large library that the average person can't go to in the basement of the Vatican, supposedly. And that's supposedly where they found in a box the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew. Remember that?
Yeah.
2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
So the only reason I'm putting all this up here, guys, is to show you that most scholars, they agree that the Testament of Job was first written between the 1st century BC, that's 100 years before Yeshua, or up to 100 years after Yeshua, because they do find a lot of Syriac manuscripts from this. Now, with that said, there's some scholars that believe the Epistle of James in the canon actually pulls from the tradition of patience in his reference to Job in James chapter 5, verse 7 through 11. So in this passage here, where James says, be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer awaits the precious fruit of the soil, how patient he is for the fall and the spring rains. You too be patient and strengthen your hearts, because the Lord's coming is near. Do not complain about one another, brothers, so that you will not be judged. Look, the judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in affliction, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. See how blessed we consider those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen the outcome from the Lord. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So that, I don't know, Ken, I don't know if that's true, but that's what this scholar thinks.
That is such a relevant word for us today, eh? Brother James there. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it definitely does line up with, the content in the Testament of Job. So I can see why someone would think that. But then again, I mean, I think that's a slight stretch. The actual canonical book of Job is full of him persevering too. So I'm just not.
I agree.
The greatest.
I don't know where. That's why I say just this modern guy. And what's surprising to me was to find this modern scholar guy just pulls his idea was from that means he read the Testament of Job, and for whatever reason, the Epistle of James mentioned in chapter 5 made him think of the Testament of Job and not the canonical book of Job. And I'm sitting there going like, man, I'd like to interview this guy and figure out why. Yeah, because I've read both. We've studied both for quite some time, and I wouldn't exactly think of that right off the bat. I'll just be honest.
Me neither.
So we've already talked about this. This is Job 42:17 in the Septuagint, because this is also manuscript history. Okay. And this one specifically is about the canonical book of Job being a part of the Hebrew scholars who translated Old Testament books into Greek on the commission of Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, around the 3rd century. That's 250 years approximately before Yeshua. Yep. So in this particular Greek translation of the book of Job, the very last chapter has all this extra information that the Hebrew Septuagint doesn't. Ken and I did 2 full
Masoretic text.
I should say the Masoretic text doesn't. Yeah. Which was 1100 years after this Greek translation.
Yeah.
And this one stands out to me, Ken. This one stands out. We're reading the book of Job, and it mentions another book where Job is mentioned, and it's a Syriac book.
Yeah.
So why is it mentioning it? Am I to believe that in the days that the Septuagint was translated from Hebrew to Greek, 200 plus years before Yeshua, there was already another book in Syriac written about Job?
You could definitely believe that. And I think there's definitely a case to be made that is legitimate. And when I did read this part of this chapter here, that this is the connection that I made instantly too, right? How can you not? This man is described in the Syriac book as living in the land of Osis, and this is what we see obviously in the Testament of Job. This is the connection, right? We have the the assertion, and then we have the actual book that it's asserting about.
Right.
So now the big thing for me is the Syriac language. From what I can tell, scholars kind of place it around the 1st century AD as manifesting around that time, which to me isn't even that big of a deal, because as we know, scribes they can add stuff to the scriptures along the way to add more context. And I mean, for them to say that this was written in the Syriac book, and at the time in the 1st century they had the Testament of Job, and someone wanted to, make an addendum to the current version of the Septuagint at that time by adding it, why would that be something that's bad, especially if the Syriac book of Job came from a previous language like Hebrew? You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, that's not a big deal, even if the Syriac language did manifest around the 1st century. To me, it doesn't dispute that it's not a legitimate book. But
well,
so
we do have
what are you
evidence.
thinking?
Well, we do have a historical understanding of the Syriac language. It is a dialect of Aramaic. And what I thought was interesting, I also found the same information that scholars say Syriac is something that came around in the 1st century AD, but yet they don't talk about the 5 different dialects of Syriac. And they don't talk about one of the most prominent, I can't remember the name of it, it's the Orians, who were from Edessa, Macedonia, which is where a lot of the Syriac copies were found of scriptures. And they talk about the history of this place in Macedonia that's called Edessa. It was approximately 247 BC. It was established under the Seleucids in the Greek Roman, or the Greek Empire, and about 100 years later it was taken over by the Romans. And they spoke a wide mixture of Greek and Aramaic. And I think that that's fascinating. There's actually a terminology for Edessan Aramaic that comes directly from that town in Macedonia, which is in the former region of Syria that was controlled by the Greeks. So I hope people are following. I'm trying to make this as simplified as possible.
Connect the dots.
And so the purpose is that if Syriac, which is a variant of Syrian, the language Syrian, is an actual dialect of Aramaic, and this country was established, or this place was established around the same time the Septuagint was penned, that's why I would lean towards thinking there's a lot of evidence that would lead me to think that there's not an addendum to the Septuagint, that the reference in Job 42:17 Septuagint of another book in Syriac speaking about Job is not something that was just added in later. That's just my idea of where the history of this specific large group of Syriac manuscripts have been found in this place that was around during the days of the Septuagint being created by the Greeks. So something to consider. But then we also have this little idea here where the canonical book of Job itself, not the Testament of Job, but the canonical book of Job, was discovered in Cave 2 in Qumran amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, only in Aramaic and Hebrew, not in Syriac. So what do we, does that mean just because the guys of Qumran and the people that created that library and buried it, they didn't include the Testament of Job or have a Syriac version of Job? Does that mean that there was none? No, it doesn't.
No, definitely not.
But it's just,
and it could still be in one of those caves still.
Right. Yeah. They could still find it.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say here is I think it's interesting that we've got the Septuagint approximately 200 and something years earlier than the Qumran buried scrolls, mentioning another book about Job in Syriac that wasn't even buried amongst the Qumran caves. So that's interesting. I don't know what to make of it. I just want to share as much information as we could find about this, Sean, with the audience.
I'm not even sold on the fact that everything that they've claimed they found at Qumran is just that. I mean,
exactly.
We both know who goes in there, excavates, they try to control a narrative to tell us what they found, what they didn't find. But at the end of the day, who knows?
Well, who knows they have publicly withheld because they allowed private buyers to get those 4 Aramaic copies of the book of First Enoch. You know what I'm saying? So they've publicly withheld from the people, findings from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah,
like you're saying, and so people literally haven't put eyes on those 4 Aramaic copies, which is really suspect. So totally. Why would they do that? But either way, we're going to try to get through the first 6 chapters of this book today, and if you want to, we can try to get through 3.
Sean, every time we set out to cover a certain amount of chapters in a book, we never end up actually covering it because we just, I mean, how can you? We don't want to stifle the dialogue, right? And that's what people like. They like to hear us kind of rambling a little bit on each part or some of the historicity of the book. So if we have to do multiple episodes of this, maybe we'll finish the season off with a completion of this book and start, the next season with something else. But I'm fine with doing multiple episodes beyond two if we want to truly
Okay.
get through this book, because I think it's awesome. I think it's a great book.
Yeah, if we have someone in the audience right now, Andrew Gibson. He says, "Is it an ancient Christian writing? Yes. Is there a theological reason to discredit it? No. Well, we haven't gone through it all the way, Andrew. So there's going to be some things in here we're going to talk about. But he also says, can we glean more biblical understanding from it and trust the Holy Spirit to teach us? Yes, of course. Yeah. That's what, hopefully, Andrew, if you've been watching previous episodes of Honor of Kings, hopefully you see that we try to do that as much as possible, be faithful to the text and to the Spirit leading us to. That's why we introduce the show with saying Ken and I have spent years studying the canon of 66 to be confident and competent to be able to rightly compare, if I could put it like that. Because there's some things that are kind of tricky in some of these books.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest. There's some content in this book that I struggle with. You know, Sean. Since we started researching it and studying it and reading it, I kept going to you, being like, dude, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. Like, can we? What are we going to do about that? And we're going to cover it, and I'll tell you guys what it is that I think about some of the the things that I think probably are a little tricky to understand, maybe. But Sean, we've covered in past episodes that some of the early church fathers have asserted that that Judaism essentially has taken hold of some of these books and cut things out or added things and manipulated things, right?
Yeah.
So
we talked about that in Susanna, was it? We showed evidence of actual writings from, I think it was either Tertullian or Justin Martyr, where they said there's rabbis intentionally inserting things in these books.
To mess with
people. It was the Ascension of Isaiah.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, that they intentionally messed, and that was documented that they knew that they were intentionally changing things in the Ascension of Isaiah so that it would be discredited. Yeah.
Yeah. So who knows?
Yeah.
How far reaching that is. But yeah, let's keep going. Let's do chapter 3 and see how far we've gotten in with that. But
all right, you're up, brother.
Read that. Yeah. All right. For I had 130,000 sheep, and of these I separated 7,000 for the clothing of orphans and widows and of needy and sick ones. I had a herd of 800 dogs who watched my sheep, and besides these 200 to watch my house. And I had 9 mills. Lindsay would love that, brother? Can you imagine having 200 dogs watching your house?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I had 9 mills working for the whole city and ships to carry goods. And I set them into every city and into the villages, to the feeble and sick, and to those that were unfortunate. And I had 340,000 nomadic asses, and of these I set aside 500, and the offspring of these I ordered to be sold, and the proceeds to be given to the poor and the needy. For from all the lands the poor came to meet me.
Oh, that's beautiful, man.
Yeah, it really is. It just shows his heart, right?
Yeah, I'll have a lot to say about that later.
Yeah. For the 4 doors of my house were opened, each being in charge of a watchman who had to see whether there were any people coming asking for alms, and whether they would see me sitting at one of the doors so that they could leave through the other and take whatever they needed. I also had 30 immovable tables set at all hours for the strangers alone, and I also had 12 tables spread for the widows. And if anyone came asking for alms, he found food on my table to take all he needed, and I turned nobody away to leave my door with an empty stomach. I also had 3,500 yokes of oxen, and I selected of these 500 and had them tend to the plowing. And with these I had done all the work in each field by those who would take it in charge, and the income of their crops I laid aside for the poor on their table. I also had 50 bakeries from which I sent the bread to the table for the poor, and I had servants selected for their service. There were also some strangers who saw my goodwill. They wished to serve as waiters themselves. Others, being in distress and unable to obtain a living, came with requests saying, "We pray you, since we also can fill this office of waiters and have no possession, Have pity upon us, and advance money to us, in order that we may go into the great cities and sell merchandise. And the surplus of our profit we may give as help to the poor, and then shall we return to you your own money. And when I heard this, I was glad that they should take this altogether from me, for the husbandry of charity for the poor. And with a willing heart I gave them what they wanted, and I accepted their written bond, but would not take any other security from them except the written document. And they went abroad and gave to time poor as far as they were successful. Frequently, however, some of their goods were lost on the road or on the sea, or they would be robbed of them. Then they would come and say, We pray you, act generously towards us, in order that we may see how we can restore to you your own. And when I heard this, I had sympathy with them, and handed to them their bond, and often having read it before them, tore it up and released them of their debt, saying to them, What I have consecrated for the benefit of the poor, I shall not take from you. And so I accepted nothing from my debtor. And when a man with cheerful heart came to me, saying, I am not in need to be compelled to be a paid worker for the poor, but I wish to serve the needy at your table. And he consented to work, and he ate his share. So I gave him his wages nevertheless, and I went home rejoicing. And when he did not wish to take it, I forced him to do so, saying, I know that you are a laboring man who looks for and waits for his wages, and you must take it. Never did I defer paying the wages of the hireling or any other, nor keep back in my house for a single evening his hire that was due to him. Those that milk the cows and the ewes signaled to the passerby that they should take their share. For the milk flowed in such plenty that it curdled into butter on the hills and by the roadside, and by the rocks in the hills the cattle lay, which had given birth to their offspring. For my servants grew weary keeping the meat of the widows and the poor and dividing it into small pieces. For they would curse and say, Oh, that we had of his flesh, and that we could be satisfied. Although I was very kind to them. I also had 6 harps, and 6 servants to play the harps, and also a cithara, and a decacord, and I struck it during the day. And I took the cithara, and the widows responded after their meals. And with the musical instrument I reminded them of God, that they should give praise to the Lord. And when my female slaves would murmur, then I took the musical instruments and played as much as they would have done for their wages, and gave them respite from their labor and sighs. What a righteous dude. Crazy. Following Torah.
So much Torah everywhere.
So much kingdom language too, eh? And like,
yes,
it's unbelievable. I mean,
this just makes me smile, man. Just, in fact, the first several times I read this and I started realizing like what I was actually reading, I'll be honest, it made me cry. Like I'm tearing up right now. I'm just like, this dude, the heart, and I'm thinking to myself in the practical in the modern day, how many little inklings of this that we see through like John 3:16 missions. There was a churches, like there's a church up the road from us a couple blocks away that's advertising today from 4:30 to 6:30 free meal, and there's other little places where you can go and you can volunteer to work for your meal. And so your working is to help serve the tables for people coming in to eat. And then after the homeless people come in and eat, then you get a meal, but you had to do the dishes and help clean up the tables and everything. So, and just little stuff like that. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I know that I doubt, and I know that this seems like a little bit of a judgment. And I don't mean this in a harsh judgment, but I'm doubting the people in those scenarios are doing it directly because of Deuteronomy 24 or Deuteronomy 15.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I doubt that they're doing it. That's just the Holy Spirit prompting them to do good to their fellow man. And they're trying to figure out what's the most practical way we can do this. And there's so many places in here where that occurs. And I'll stop rambling so we can kind of dissect a little bit. But man, this is a moving little passage.
It really is. His sister Lisa Mendez in the chat there saying, "Make Torah great again." Yeah, right. Amen. I mean, it's going to be made great again. The whole world will be under its influence in days ahead. But this whole chapter was very reminiscent, Sean, of I can't remember which chapter it was in the book of Jasher, and it might even be in Jubilees too. But Abraham, right? Abraham had a house. He had a large house that had 4 doors towards the cardinal directions, and they were always open. And he had tables and people to come by. Travelers would come in, and he would allow them to eat. He would teach them righteousness, right? And they'd be on their way with a meal and a hearty meal and a good message, right? And so this is just that's what I see here is this, like, this is his heart, is to do that. That's the part of the gospel message, right? Is to feed the widow, the poor, the orphan, take care of them. This is true community. This is how we love our neighbor. Truly, this is exemplified right here in this passage, and we're seeing a real good glimpse of Job's heart, which we don't really get to see in the Protestant book of Job, right?
Can you imagine today if one of the extreme, like, can you imagine someone that has extreme wealth, like the Koch brothers or Elon Musk, or, how about just the billions and billions of dollars taken in by the US government? And what if they were actually going out and doing this directly? Now, what they do with the US government taxes is they bring in all this taxation, and it goes to different programs. Those programs are overseen by people with salaries. Those salaries are overseen by other people that are in oversight committees who are employed by tax dollars. So by the time the actual funds, the funds are a lot less than what they've initially taken on taxes for a program. Those programs are then taken to private companies as stipends or bonds or grants or federal, like some sort of federal handout to them, so they can do certain things. But there's always rules attached to that money. Where here is Job, the king of his land. He gets the money and he's like, no strings attached. What can I do? And this is a wonderful example of what he gets to do. And it's just impressive. I don't know how many people this would feed, but he's talking about having hundreds of thousands of sheep and nomadic asses. And I just love verse 4. He says he sets aside 500 and the offspring of those 500. Well, I'm pretty sure a donkey produces, or what, once a year? I can have a foal once a year.
I think so. Yeah.
Put it in the chat, guys, if I'm misquoting that.
Yeah, that I think that's right. Yeah.
And you could have up to 5 for 6 in a lifetime, So I just think that this is amazing because he's taken all that food and he's willing to give it, to be sold, and the proceeds to be given to the poor and needy. So it's amazing.
Yeah. So Sean, one of the verses, well, a couple of these verses here in this chapter stood out to me as possibly being contradictory to what Job chapter 1 says. And I had sent you this message months ago, just regarding the amount, like the sheep here, where it says he's asserting he had 130,000 sheep. And Job chapter 1, verse 3, it says, and his livestock included 7,000 sheep.
Okay.
So, but then it goes on, if we read the Testament of Job here, and he says, and he separated of that 7,000 for the clothing of orphans and widows, right? So that number 7,000 lines up with Job 1 verse 3's 7,000. But what do you think's going on here? Is Job 1 just giving the numbers that he separated from the overall flocks that he had? Do you think that's kind of what it's doing there?
What I think is interesting is that I don't know if that's what it's doing, but I do know that there's another number discrepancy when it gets down to his age at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's weird that we see that often with different manuscripts, is that the theology and the story is very, very, very close, but then there's like a weird difference in the number of something.
Yeah, it does it a few times. It's not even just the sheep. It's a couple of the oxen and a couple other things, right? But
yeah. And then, like I said, at the end, his age, it says that he lives longer in the Testament of Job than it does even in the Septuagint Job. So this could be why little stuff like this could be why 12th century AD rabbis looked back at Job and commented and said, "Oh, there's too many Jobs. It's all nonsense. It's all fiction." And I'm like, that's not a good hermeneutic view. No. it's horrible.
It's pretty bad.
But so I agree with you. Yeah, that's something that we'll have to keep in mind, that there's a little bit different in some of these numbers.
Yeah. Like I said, some of them do line up, and he set aside 7,000. Maybe that's what Job chapter 1 is talking about, is the set aside ones. But it's just the way it words it is, this is his total livestock that he had. And I don't know. So yeah, I'll be honest, that was the first time I read that, and I was like, yeah, that doesn't line up. But
right. Yeah, the numbers are off.
Yeah.
So just like we've talked about in the past, we've got the Septuagint and the Masoretic, and Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, the ages of all the patriarchs are off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, what do we do with that? How do we clearly there's either issues with translations into English, or there's an issue with from one generation to another. And I hate to be the guy that's always going back to blaming the Pharisees.
It seems like a convenient thing to do because especially when you have people in the the second, third century claiming that that's what they were known for doing,
Yeah.
they would mess things up. It would make sense that they would mess them up, and we would get later on down the line translations of these manuscripts with these new numbers. You
Yeah.
know, who
Yeah.
knows?
If that was that how they try to get people to discredit stuff, I'm not sure. But I think it's fascinating though, what it is putting forward. And actually, I reviewed this yesterday in my Torah portions. I think it's in Job 29, where Job is talking about how he used to be blessed of the Lord and how he used to. Here, I'll put this on screen real quick. And this is reminiscent of this chapter. He talks about how I long for the months gone by, and for the days when God watched over me. His lamp shone above my head, and by his light I walked through the darkness when I was in my prime, when the friendship of God rested on me, when the Almighty was still with me and my children were around me, when my steps were bathed in cream. So that makes me reminiscent of this claim here about all the
The
milk,
hills, the
the
butter going
hills,
downhill.
yeah, and the rocks poured out for me streams of oil. When I went to the city gate and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the old men rose to their feet. And then he goes on to be talking about how he helped the poor, the widowless, the father, and he administered justice as a judge over the people. And I just think that's interesting because this is a very brief little mention of how he walked in righteousness and he had great wealth, but it doesn't go to the same lengths that we see in this particular chapter of just why Job 1 mentions him having this abundance of possessions. This tries to suggest it's because he was using them to feed people.
Yeah.
At verse 5, from all the lands the poor came to meet me. How many lands do you think that was?
I have no idea, man.
Exactly, right?
Many
So,
lands.
so this is what we're going to read. I think probably by next week we'll get to the chapters where his friends show up, and they actually in their exposition to him they say, "Was this the Job who sat at a table for people from all the lands?" People come from afar to get food from him, and you're just like, dude, this is crazy. The amount of this is like ideal. This is what you would want people to do on a regular basis if they're following people with wealth, instead of just trying to figure out how to make more companies to get more wealth and hoard money, or find political control. It's like, why don't you just what if we just blessed the people and made sure people were good?
Yeah. That's how a kingdom operates. Like it'll operate in such blessing will flow out from it when it's operating under the banner of Torah, right? And you have the king actually setting himself apart and doing those things. Like that's the outcome is just utter blessing, right? Double fold this and that, and it's crazy.
What do you think about verse 7 here? Do you think the mention of the strangers, the immovable 30 immovable tables set out at all hours for the strangers, you think that's talking about people using it in a biblical sense, like if you're not a part of his land, then you're a stranger out of covenant with God, or just literally a stranger from the next kingdom nearby?
Yeah, the latter. That's how I would understand it. Yeah, just anybody that's not a resident or a citizen of that land.
And what's amazing, he says, anyone that comes for me for alms, he found food on my table to take all he needed. So it's not even like he's just apportioning a certain amount of meals, but they can just take all that. That's just wild. That's just I can't even imagine. Like I've hosted large, like just recently we had to Lindsay and we purchased all the food for a funeral, and I had to go through all the calculations of how much could the average person eat. I'm dealing with this little detail with the restaurant, and I'm thinking to myself like, I almost felt this weird twinge of guilt because I didn't even want to care about the price, but I'm not wealthy, so I had to care about the price.
Yeah.
And I had to figure out okay, how much can the average person eat? How many men are going to be there? How many women are going to be there? What are your portion sizes? And all that and all those little details as we were going through it made me feel guilty.
You don't want someone like me showing up, Sean.
Oh, you're just going to eat it all? Yeah.
Dude, I have an insatiable appetite. It's crazy.
Yeah, so I get, to me, this is something I guess I would pray that
would be amazing to get to in our lifetime. You know what I mean? Just having the ability to feed so many people and not have to worry about the bill at the end. And it's interesting, like the 30 immovable tables. So first of all, I'm not thinking like, when I think of table, I'm thinking like something like an average size table that we have maybe in the house or something like that, right? But these tables are probably massive.
Yeah.
They're probably massive banquet tables, and immovable in the sense of what they like
They're
bolted
so
them to the
heavy.
ground, or they're
They just,
so thick and heavy because they have so much produce and
yeah,
meat and all the, all the goods on it, that it just weighs it down. It's like, it's
made
cool
of
to,
solid oak and just probably has tree trunks for legs and just full of food and
yeah.
everything. Yeah, that'd be amazing. So this part right here, not the bakeries. I think that's also fascinating too, because he's not just focusing on like meat or vegetables, but he's also got pastries for them, which
He's
is
got it
bread.
all.
And
Yeah.
and
All
these
food groups.
servants, they see his goodwill. It says some strangers who saw my goodwill, they wish to serve as waiters themselves. So he's inspiring other people to good works with
Yeah.
this. That's amazing. And then people that were in stress, they're actually trying to come get produce they can go and sell, or get goods from him they go and sell in other cities. And this is amazing to me, because this is like, now he's inspiring them to think, okay, you want to raise money for the poor, I'm going to go sell product for you, and we'll take the proceeds and give it to the poor.
Yeah.
And he's getting people in this collective effort. And brother, I don't talk about this much, but like financially, this is a dream of mine, is to create a collaborative community of business people that literally just designate profits to be able to go towards helping people in need and using and doing Torah. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
I haven't been able to formulate it in my brain to even get a good working business plan for it yet. And I'm doing all this other stuff at Lighthouse right now, and which may give
Well,
me the catapult.
Lighthouse is the avenue.
It may give you the
Eventually.
catapult for that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
may. But like, that's been on my heart for a long time, because
I know it
I've
has,
even,
man. Yeah.
like, I remember back in 2015, I was trying to talk to local churches that I lived at in Tulsa, where I was like, what if we all came together as churches and we just asked the people in the church if they had a business idea, and then we had business consultants that are part of the eldership of the church that would work with them on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to help them flesh out their business idea and help them get off their ground and like start their business for them. And collectively, anyone that from the church that wants to help towards that, obviously there'd be an evaluation of the people and whether they had the inclination to do business or not, right? But like, this was my heart, was like, what if the community came together, even within your mainstream churches? Because you get 100 people sitting in the pews at a small church. That's a potentially 100 gifted, talented people with their own special business knack that could create this amazing business. They just need to learn like these basics to get off the ground. And then collectively, whatever they bring, this would be upon, it's not communism, it's their choice to give back to the church profits from their business that help them get started. And then all that goes to people that are in need. And I just thought, like, why isn't anyone doing this? And if they are doing this, I've never heard of it. But here's Job doing this 3,000 years ago in this book.
Yeah, it's kingdom economics, man. That's impressive. It's so good. And my heart's there too, brother. I would love to see that too. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Get to that point. We have so many believers out there that we would have the ability to do that. It's just collaborating and finding a way to, kickstart that would be.
Yeah. And McKinsey saying that what I'm describing is what nonprofits do today. And you're right, ma'am. But the difference is the businesses they help get up and going, there's no guarantee that there's no allegiance, there's no community, there's no guarantee that random business is going to give back to a church community that's actually imploring Torah. So that's, while they do part of what I've just described, and it's wonderful, I don't know if they do it to the fullness of what I'm seeing in Job here.
Yeah.
Anything else in this chapter you'd like to mention, brother?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few other things. It's just, once again, showing the heart of Job, right? He's got individuals who want to go out and about and with the merchandise and do everything we just described. And Job describes that sometimes some of the goods that he had sent with them would be lost along the road, or they'd just simply be robbed of them, right? And then those people would come back and be like, act generous, please, towards us, so that we can kind of restore to you what you gave to us, to you for your own. And he would have sympathy over them, right? He would rip up their certificate of the bond and say, don't worry about it. Like, your heart was good towards this. I'm not going to make you pay me back from being robbed, or, some of the mishaps that happened along the way on the sea and the land. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
just shows like Job wasn't a stickler, right? He exuded love and it's just, what a heart. You know what I mean? It's just, I'd love.
He didn't
Holy
use
guy.
this opportunity to create more indentured servitude, for
Yeah.
him. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So this is beautiful, beautiful from a business perspective. So there's a place in here where it calls the waiters deacons. Did you see that?
Yes, I did. I didn't read
Verse
the
15.
bracketed. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that the definition of a deacon?
Are they synonymous? I mean, that's
I'm looking it up right now. It's a clerical ranking just below priest, a lay assistant to a Protestant minister. Let's look at a worldly definition from Merriam-Webster. Nope, still associated with religious
with
terms. But anyway,
Catholicism,
I
right?
just always wondered, yeah, mostly with Catholicism, but I just wondered, I don't know if that's like the origin of the word is just like, because we hear Paul talking about deacons and stuff. And so, and of course, he's always talking about them being people that are willing to minister and help in the church. And we know
Yeah.
like the first century church was a place people came to for medicine and help and food. And
Food. Yeah.
yeah,
In Acts where they're talking about like don't forget the widow and the orphan and feeding them and
yeah.
setting aside people to do that, right? Yeah, maybe
And see
that's
that in itself, guys, and I'm going to go full screen for a minute. I'm going to make this 30 seconds. That in itself destroys the beast system. If we do what Testament of Job claims that Job was doing here, and if we do Deuteronomy 15, if we do Acts, what was mentioned in Acts, in 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, if we are mindful to collaboratively as a community take of our excess and we want to help the poor, want to help them get off their feet and want to, or get on their feet and get sustainable, they won't be another slave for the state to use
mm-hmm.
because they'll be able to create their own life and be sufficient on their own. And you're putting pride within them, a healthy version of pride. You're putting a good feeling in them that they can actually take care of themselves and they don't have to depend on any form of state or federal government to do that for them. So like, I feel like the more the church moves away, and this is a very blanket generalization, so please forgive me. I'm not talking about your particular life or anyone listening. I'm just saying in a general sense, I feel like the more that Christians as a whole has moved away from this idea, the state has room to swoop in with all this entrapment of, well, that will gladly give you more resources, but they don't tell you that it's going to cause the economy to suffer greatly.
Yeah.
We'll gladly print more money and hand out money to you, but then it causes you to not want to go get a job like America is suffering from right now.
Yeah.
Supposedly we got like 11 million job openings, which is crazy. And then all these people are still unemployed because they're just getting government handout.
Yeah. Canada too. Yeah.
Are they doing that up there? Yeah. But
Yeah,
I know
you
that
got
they want to
CARB.
push people towards universal basic income.
Yeah.
I know that's part of the
That's the
Great
plan.
Reset.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that is the answer to that is already in Torah.
Yeah, 100%, brother. 100%. Yeah. Verse 29, where it says, "Never did I defer paying the wages of the hireling or any other, nor keep back in my house for a single evening his hire that was due to him." That to me points right back to Deuteronomy 24:15, where the Father, through Moses, is essentially saying, you must pay the worker their wages each day before sunset, right? Because they're poor and they're counting on it. Yeah. And so this is, I mean, obviously Job had that type of understanding of, pay them before the evening expires type of thing, right? Like, because it's that's what is due to them and that's what they deserve. And so that's another kingdom Torah principle. Yeah, it's awesome.
Where did Job learn that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Abraham pass it down to one of the sons of Esau must have known it, right? I mean, it's just amazing to me. I know that this book claims he married a lady from Arabia. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or he lived on the border of. No. The Septuagint claims that he lived on the border of Arabia. In Idumea.
Yes, but it does say right in the first, wasn't it the first chapter there, that he married the woman from, I think she was Arabia, an Arabian woman. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and if this lines up with Septuagint Job, he lives on the border of Idumea and Arabia, and then he marries an Arabian woman. Well, the Arabians are descendants of Ishmael, and Jubilee says that Abraham taught Ishmael Torah. So it seems like these communities are gravitating, and even though Esau apparently was not good, and Jubilee tells us how him and his immediate sons battled with Jacob and their sons, it doesn't mean all their extended descendants rejected Torah. And it clearly we see with Job and his life that was the case, that they did learn and pick up Torah and keep it. So
Yeah. One more thing there, brother. It just shows another layer who Job is. When his female, it says slaves here, when the female workers that he had in his kingdom there would murmur,
what verse you on?
right? This is verse 37 of chapter 3. It says that he would take the musical instruments and play as much as they would have done for their wages, and just to give them respite for their laborers and sighs. Isn't that hilarious? He's like, all right, you're not going to play, I'll play. As much as I was going to pay you, I'll play. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I don't know what a sitar is, or a sitara. Do you know what
I'm not sure. Or a decacord.
Yeah,
No idea.
some type of harp or something, stringed instruments.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just so much goodness in here. I mean, this is an amazing chapter. I don't know. What do you think, man? Do you want to go to another chapter, or we call it enough for this?
I think we'll call it enough for the night. But I have no issues going chapter by chapter and seeing this book through. Even if it takes like 2 more episodes, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, because even though we went over some really interesting stuff right off the bat, it gets even more interesting. Like, this book is fascinating.
Oh yeah. No, I had fun, man. I had a good time going through this. It's definitely a good read. Hopefully, you brothers and sisters watching have enjoyed it, and will go home and read or you're probably at home watching this, but read a copy of this book and study it, and join us for next week. We're going to be going into chapter 4, and does it line up with the canon of 66 so far? I think it does. I mean, there's some minor discrepancies, but
interestingly enough, they are the same type of discrepancies we see in other manuscripts, whether comparisons with the Septuagint and the Masoretic. So little discrepancies that you see that between First Kings and First Chronicles, talking about certain things. So yeah,
exactly,
it's interesting. All right, brother. Any last words before we go?
Well, I'll just say I am coming back to a more of a full-time position here at Hanging on His Words. So I will definitely be releasing more videos, and so keep an eye out for more content to come. If you're new here, please subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications for when I do release more content, and definitely go over to Sean's channel, Kingdom in Context, Kingdom Cast. Keep an eye out for Lighthouse. We're all keeping an eye out for that, Sean. We're praying and we're hoping that comes eventually.
It's requiring the patience of Job, but yes, we're doing it.
Yeah, but it might yield the same types of rewards that Job does too. So
so now next week you're going on a trip, right?
Yes, my wife and I are going to be going for about a week to the eastern part of our province before they implement fully this pass. They're calling it the Scotia Pass, and so we want to kind of travel around and do things before things get really locked down again, and we're not allowed into establishments anymore and stuff. So that's where we're going to be doing. And
so guys, keep praying for Ken, because
not just me, it's everywhere, man. It's everywhere.
Well, I mean, it's different severities in different countries, and right now they're facing some pretty interesting restrictions in Canada. So just keep praying for he and his wife and their family, and just lift him up in prayer, guys, because we won't be back next week, but the following week we hope to be back, and before Canada initiates a full-on jab pass, and whatever that may look like. So I know that there's a lot of states pushing back against that in the U.S., and there's other states that are wanting to do it yesterday. So we're in the same battle here, but it seems like Canada's kind of progressed a little faster towards that type of restriction. And we don't know. We're just praying for Ken. We don't know his availability in the future, and we're just praying for the Father to protect and make a way.
Thank you very much. There's not much pushback like you Americans at the South there. So I wish we had that spirit more in this country. But at the end of the day, the Father's got it all in His hands, and we trust Him, and we're looking for the kingdom to come. That gives us joy. And just thank you for all the kind comments and messages over the last several months that I've been absent on the channel. I really appreciate you guys, checking in and just inquiring as to where I am and how I'm doing, and if I'll be releasing more content. And so, I will be. And I love our spiritual family, Sean. We got some good peeps in this family for sure.
All right, brother. We love you, and we hope to see you back here as soon as we can get back, and we'll pick back up on the Testament of Job next time.
Sounds good.